And then for yourself, we do a little homework on all of our guests, and we can see that you've been interested in language, in engineering of language. It looks like since 1995. You went to the University of Lisbon, studied language and knowledge engineering. I don't even know what that is. You got your Master's of Science at Carnegie Mellon, language technologies, and you got a PhD from Carnegie Mellon in language technologies. So it feels like you've been trying to solve this problem since possibly when you were a kid. Give us an idea. When did you think, I want to solve this problem?
So my mom is not retired, but she was a professor of English linguistics. So it was kind of like I grew up with language as a thing, and I think the thing that always fascinated me really was consciousness, like deep AI problem of what is consciousness? What is intelligence? How do we interact with it? And I think language is just such a great window and a great perspective to look into intelligence and consciousness that kind of, when I combine with my environment, it drew me in. So I started coding when I was 6. I was, the Spectrum 48K doing BASIC, the time that you had games with tapes that you had to like play them, and you'd code these games and you like run these things, and you'd take you 5 minutes to know even if there was a bug, which inevitably there was, and debugging was a pain in the ass. It was kind of cool. So I kind of always knew that for me, computers were just such a great window to study and model topics that were interesting to me. When I got to college, the knowledge and language engineering was kind of like, it's a major in artificial intelligence with a minor in computational linguistics. And so it was basically pretty much what I ended up doing in master's and PhD, but at an undergrad level. And so I was really lucky because I got into that course. That course basically existed for 10 years. I got in the second year that it existed. And then after I left 6 years later, they stopped giving it because it was in 2 different colleges and there was a lot of administrative hassles and there was all of these issues. And then I managed to get into CMU, and the language technologies department at CMU was really way ahead of its time. The scale, the size, the kind of stuff that people were doing was really incredible. And so for me, even though right now we're focused on translation, the problem that was always more appealing to me was semantic processing. Kind of once you go beyond the surface area of the language and you start dealing with concepts, kind of how do we actually express thinking in language? That was always something that fascinated me. And I think we know very little. I mean, to be honest, like we have some ideas, but it's not by any means a solved problem. Like, how do you think? Like, what is that thing that at every given time you have this massive parallel thing happening inside your brain? You're like, right now you're talking to me, and there's your eyes are getting visual input, and maybe you're hungry or cold or hot, or and there's like preconceptions, and maybe you're not feeling so well because there's a cough, something, right? There's all this stuff happening, and your brain is managing your body, and you're breathing, your heart is beating, and all of this stuff. Somehow, this super parallel Albert becomes serialized into the consciousness that is Albert, that is like, I'm one being, right? And so what happens in that moment, right? And I think part of that is the things that made you conscious are also typically thoughts that are expressed to some sort of language, even if it's internal, right? And depending which language you're using, like if you're using Chinese or English to think, you can express different capabilities. Each human language actually gives you different capabilities to think, right? And so it seems like language, it becomes a bit the scaffolding of thought and somehow really influences your ability to create consciousness. But we don't really know how this happens or exactly what comes first and what actually drives it. So for me, it's super fascinating.
Yeah, the way you describe it is almost like philosophical, metaphysical, in addition to the computational science that's behind it. All these things that have to be true for someone to understand what they're reading or understanding.
And in fact, like there's this weird thing happening with language, which is there's a Dunning-Kruger effect. There's a lot of applications of this, but one of them is this idea that when you're really an expert in something, it's easy for you. And so you tend to think that it's an easy problem because you've mastered it. And language is a bit like that. We've been speaking since we're 1, right? And so we think, well, everyone speaks, so it's kind of an easy thing. But it's a really complex thing that we do. Our ability to deal with uncertainty and to deal with noise and our ability to switch topics and to it's incredible. But we just don't perceive it as super hard. And what happens is we kind of are underappreciating some of the things that are happening in language. Like, for example, all the stuff we're seeing on the political spectrum with polarization is a bit a consequence, in my perspective, of overabundance of information for which language actually plays a part in the sense of, for example, so in the 80s, a lot of people in Japan used to be very popular to go and do a master's in the US. There would be a lot of Japanese students in American universities. there's very, very few right now, and even pre-COVID, and the question was why. And there's a certain perception, once you have access to a huge abundance of information, there's just a less of a curiosity to go outside the stuff that you are already sitting in. And we see this in the polarization of politics, or ability for people to just, read stuff that creates an echo chamber about what they know already, right? And so that leads to lack of curiosity of exploring and being faced with a diversity of opinions and a diversity of languages. So even though we are in this global world where the expectations of companies are present, it also leads to people really expecting that everything happens in their own native language, and actually people being less willing to function and operate under their lives in a language that they're not comfortable with, right? Which is, sorry. As you can see, I tend to get a bit excited about language, so apologies for that.
Hey, thanks for watching. Subscribe to this channel for more great IT thought leadership. And thanks to our partners at Salesforce Platform for making this show possible. Go to salesforce.com/newsletter to discover timely insights and useful tips tailored to your role.